Thank you. Thank you all for being here. My name is Gabe Feldman. I'm a professor here at Tulane Law School and the co-director of the Tulane Center for Sport. It is an honor to be up here with Coach Sumrall and Oliver Luck. I do want to say one thing I think we have in common that we are unique in is we're probably the only three people here who have not written a book. So we will be signing these notes after. But I am thrilled to be here. There is so much to talk about with college sports. There's so much to talk about with Tulane athletics. There has never been a more exciting time to be at Tulane and to be a supporter of Tulane athletics, and there's never been a more daunting time to be working in college athletics. And so while there are dark clouds over us, we have a ray of light in Tulane athletics, and our programs have never been stronger than they are today. So I want to talk about the overall landscape, and then I want to talk about how it's impacted Tulane. And I want to give a quick introduction to our two panelists. So we have Coach Jon Sumrall, who is, I think, indisputably at this point, one of the hottest, most sought-after coaches in college football and one of the most successful football coaches in Division I. After 2 incredibly successful years with Troy, came over to Tulane and led us to our 3rd conference championship game in a row. And
you know, John, there is an opening at Stanford. If you'd like to go out to the West Coast.
Do you know anybody there?
Nah.
All right, that's tampering number 1. So here's a stat that people in the room will hopefully appreciate. Only 7 programs in the country have won more games than Tulane football since 2022. Only 7 schools in the country. Stanford is not one of them. In addition to Coach's success on the sideline, he was a standout football player in high school and in college, led Kentucky in tackles his junior year, and was recently inducted into the Huntsville-Madison County Hall of Fame. So awesome. Congratulations on that. Yeah. Then we've got Oliver Luck, whose resume is too long to read. He's been an executive in pretty much every major sport in this country and some that are not in this country. Was a star high school football player, college football player at West Virginia, NFL player, athletic director at West Virginia, high-ranking executive at the NCAA, high-ranking executive with the NFL, ran the Houston Sports Authority, was a general manager of an NFL Europe team, was the chairman of Altia Sports Partners, on and on and on. But I will say, although Oliver has an incredible resume, he was a finalist for a Rhodes Scholarship. Did not win.
Correct.
Did not win. Yeah, and I just got to knock him down a couple of pegs. In his last season in the NFL. Now, he played multiple seasons in the NFL.
You always say this. This is got it.
All right, 31 of 60 passes, not a great completion percentage, 341 yards, 1 touchdown, and 5 interceptions. So your QB
it was a rough year. Let's just say it was a rough year.
QB rating was about 22. All right, so let's talk about the new landscape of college sports, and I would normally spend a long time talking about the history and where we've been and where we are now, but we can just fast forward to where we are now. Because with the proposed House settlement, which as many of you in the room probably know, is going to do a few major things. One, it's going to compensate athletes who played since 2016 up to $2.8 billion in damages. It is going to create a new system of college sports going forward where each school will be allowed to, but not required, be allowed to pay up to, in year 1, $20.5 million a year directly to athletes. That could be divided up as the school see fits. And college athletes will continue to be able to receive compensation for the use of their name, image, and likeness, but there will be greater restrictions on boosters or collectives paying that money. And so really the system is in part designed to look more like professional sports, where there is a salary cap. Athletes can still do NIL deals, but those NIL deals can't be used as an end around to pay more to your athletes than the cap, right? So that's the landscape we're looking at. The case will have its final approval hearing on April 7th, the night of the men's national championship game. We don't know if the judge is going to approve it. We assume she will. But let's assume all of that is going to come to fruition. And over the last 3 years, most states have permitted schools and collectives to pay money to athletes for their NIL, which has opened the door for now millions and millions of dollars flowing to college athletes. Oliver, let's start with college basketball because we're in the middle of the college basketball tournament. Tell us your thesis on the impact that NIL has had on the Sweet 16 and the tournament itself.
So my thesis, which it's not original with me, I think a lot of people tend to believe this that follow college basketball closely, but the thesis is that NIL and revenue share, together those two forces, is the death knell for Cinderella, right? So Cinderella, we all love Cinderella, the magic moments when, Drake or Loyola Chicago or whomever knocks off one of the big boys. Probably won't happen anymore. This, I think, was the first year that the Sweet 16 on the men's side was all power football schools. And if you follow the news, the MVP of the Mountain West Conference, I can't even remember what school he goes to, but it's a Mountain West, so it's a G5. He just transferred or is in the transfer portal and he's going to leave. So all of those star players at the smaller schools will get gobbled up by the big boys because they have the resources to attract those kids. So what I find sad is that Cinderella is a reason that a lot of us watch the tournament. There's a lot of basketball on, and the Power Four football schools have great basketball programs. The U of H game last night was fantastic. That was a great inbounds play for those that saw it at the very end of the game to win. But those upsets that really are the sort of sauce in the gumbo, if you will, or the hot sauce in the gumbo won't exist really.
You can
but
tell
rarely.
he's not from Louisiana.
Anyway, that's my thesis, and what worries me a little bit is that the Cinderella concept is very attractive to viewers. They like to watch those teams kind of get on a hot streak and get on a run and knock off 2 or 3 and find themselves in the Final Four. I don't know if we're going to see that as much anymore, which is kind of sad.
Yeah, and we're not sure if this is a one-year outlier or if this is going to be the new normal. I will say, many of you know I'm a diehard Duke fan and Tulane fan, but I'm a triple Dookie, and it is awesome to see that helping lead the way for Duke is none other than Tulane's Sion James, who's been one of the star players for that Duke team.
But that's another example, right, of a player from a smaller school, moving up to one of the big boys. And that's just, I think, going to get even more intense. So there's also, because of this, there's this schism between the big schools, and this is true of football as well. The Cinderella part about football isn't necessarily the case because it's a different game, more guys, et cetera. But there's a schism between the big boys and the top, whatever you want to call it, 50, 60, and the rest. That gap is really widening.
So let's, John, talk about how it impacts football and how it impacts Tulane. And I think many people in the room might know you've had a lot of turnover from last year's roster. So can you explain how many returning starters you have and the challenges that you face as a coach of Tulane football?
Yeah, we were talking before, Gabe, Oliver, myself, and this past offseason, we've gone through a complete roster shift. We had enough success on the field that a lot of unknown players were sought after by other schools. And so we've got a whopping 2 offensive returning starters and a way bigger number on defense. It's 3. All right, so we were sitting down in December, January, my head strength coach and myself, and we're usually talking about, we have core values and maybe a word or a theme of the off-season program that we're going to put like on a shirt. And Coach Witt and myself, my head strength coach, were sitting down in December, and he's like, what do you want to put on the shirts? And we're like, maybe because we're going to have like half of a team that's brand new, maybe we should just put like their names. And so on the front of the shirt, like where you would put like your name tag, is their last name. On the back, where you put your name on a jersey, is their last name. Now, the problem with that was we got to our first spring practice a couple of weeks ago, and they had numbers on, not names. I'm like, who the hell is 22? And so I had his name a couple of weeks ago on his shirt. But the truth of the story is the P4s, if you will, or the haves, they can maybe go after a top-end roster player of ours who may be a high earner at our level and pay them more to be a reserve or a backup at that level. And so you have to sometimes hopefully try to help guys understand that there may be more short-term money. What's the long-term value? Any young man that gets offered, 6 and then definitely 7 figures, that's eye-opening. That's eye-opening to all of us. I tell my coaches all the time that work for me, my assistants, like if somebody's going to double your salary, I'm not going to cuss you as you leave. I'm going to throw you a party. Like I'm not going to be mad at you. And so there's challenges that come within that. The obvious ones are fielding a competitive team, but even more so is actually just fielding a team that cares about each other, that knows each other, that plays for each other. And that camaraderie component is really, really challenging. The culture piece you have in your locker room that I felt like maybe the programs here the last couple of years and the programs I've been a part of, including here, have been elite at is creating synergy. The whole is better than the individual parts. That's really, really hard in this climate because you're just building teams every year as opposed to building a program at times. And we get checkbook whipped. I've had many conversations with kids that they're in tears in my office, like, don't want to go. Had my conversation with mom or dad or whoever, got to go. And I think as a coach this day and age, you have to understand it's our job to mentor, advise. I never look at a guy and have ill will. I just try to help them through the process. And if they feel like they have to leave, they have to leave, and we have to figure out what to do next.
And for both of you, we see numbers thrown around about what these athletes are getting, and this is primarily in football, men's basketball. We're also seeing it some in women's basketball and baseball and wrestling and hockey, depending on the school. How real are these numbers that you're hearing? Because some of them have been $10, $11 million for a high school quarterback, and then $7 million we're hearing, and then $4 or $5 million for a basketball player for 1 year, right? They're getting them maybe for 1 year. And that money would typically otherwise have gone into facilities. It would have gone into resources that could help sustain the program over the long haul. And this might get you the player for 1-2 years, but then they're gone, and you're starting all over again, and the money is gone. So are the numbers, are they close to what we're reading? Or do you think they're all just inflated wildly, and there's still good money being spent, but it's not quite as outrageous as it sounds like? Do you have a sense?
I think most of those numbers are relatively accurate. And I think that once the settlement, assuming it gets approved by Judge Wilkin, there'll be a true salary cap. And the NCAA is creating this new entity to oversee the salary cap, as you know, unrelated to the NCAA, so it'll have probably a little bit more teeth to it. But I think those numbers are real, and I think once the settlement is approved, there'll be at least some order to, sort of overseeing the $20.5 million, if in fact the school has that money. So there's a little bit of a misnomer, revenue share with student athletes. Well, there's no new revenue coming in. Tulane or West Virginia or any school has to go find it amongst the current revenue stream. So, a lot of schools won't have it. The big boys will. And they'll have additional on top, the true NIL piece, but a lot of the schools won't have it, and that'll be even harder to compete, I think, at that point.
Yeah, there's no real transparency currently. There's no, clearinghouse, if you will, where you have to report the deal. And so you hear numbers, like in recruiting is where it's always very ambiguous to us, is like a kid's in the portal, we might be recruiting him, and you hear either from a representative, himself, a family member, whoever, hey, I've got this offer. And you're like, well, maybe he does or maybe he doesn't. Who knows? There's no real, and there's no signed contract where you have to turn that in at this time. But you do get reporting and see things that are out there, and there's significant sums of money being thrown around. To your point, I do think the landscape has shifted a ton. I've said this till I'm blue in the face, and if you've been around Tulane football, you've heard me say it, humans over hardware. We're at the shift right now where it's, are your facilities good enough? But like I've told everybody that listens to me, like I can have the best roster and we can practice in a parking lot. We're going to be pretty good. I can have the worst roster and we can have the best practice facilities in the world. We're going to get our ass beat. like just truthfully, to put it candidly. And so having good players is what matters.
And are you seeing it with, obviously teams across the country, even at the highest levels, are dealing with a lot of the churn where players are leaving, looking for the next big paycheck. Have you seen an impact on the field with the quality of play where maybe it takes some teams a little bit longer to get that chemistry and that synergy that you were talking about?
No question. Our team last year had 5 defensive starters in game 1 that showed up in June. Okay, so we had a couple months to get them ready for a football game, where in the past, the development model in our game, you might have a guy in your program 2 years, 3 years before he becomes a starter, and it's so much more plug and play, and they have to get ready quicker. It's really changed how much we run. Like last year, our defense was almost so simple at times it made my stomach churn. But it had to be simple so everybody on the field knew what to do, to put our best people out there. And so I think that component, the tackling on our game has gotten worse, because you're not even worried about teaching guys the fundamentals of the game. You're worried about them just knowing what to do. And I've talked to some NFL teams, personnel people about this. I was actually on the phone this morning with one NFL GM, and the conversation we were having was about how the quality of football development out of college to the NFL has gotten worse since the transfer portal really became open, because you're just trying to get guys ready to play a game, not really develop fully as players.
I'll make one caveat to that, which is I think the quality of play from Power 4 and probably Power 5 quarterbacks has gotten better, because there's only one quarterback that can play at a time, typically. Right?
Yeah.
If you have 2 quarterbacks, you don't have one, as the old cliche goes, right? So quarterbacks have, and you need a good quarterback to be successful. You would agree, I think.
Oh, yeah.
But they've been spread around the country. I mean, it seems like every other team in the playoffs or at the top of whatever conference has a transfer quarterback. So I think that's helped the game. It's hard to recruit quarterbacks when you're 17 years old, and is this kid going to develop? Is he going to be better than this guy? Whatever. So I think the system has distributed those guys around a little bit, at least at that position.
I think that's fair. I think nobody wants to sit and be the backup. There's only one guy that gets the ball. And so where you may be stuck behind a guy and have to wait for 3 years for your turn, a guy can go get his turn earlier.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think it's fair to say that maybe some guys who were star quarterbacks 20, 30 years ago in college would not be able to play today, because there's too many good players out there. I'm talking about all.
That's probably true.
Yeah, that was a joke about it. That was.
Think about that for a moment.
Give you more notice that I'm about to.
But who could play? The great Tulane quarterback I played against Tulane when I was in college, Rock Hontus.
Yeah.
Dr. Rock Hontus. Yeah, great player.
His son's on our staff.
Awesome.
Yeah, Peter. Yeah.
And Oliver was also teammates with Archie Manning for 2 years, right? 2 years.
I backed up Archie Manning when I was a rookie Houston Oiler quarterback. Archie left the Saints to go sort of do his time in Houston. And true story, Archie would fly on Southwest Airlines, $19 a trip back and forth, right? He never moved the family to Houston. But occasionally he would bring the 2 older boys, Cooper, right, and Peyton. And as a rookie quarterback in the locker room, I would hear this pretty much every Wednesday or Thursday. Hey, Ollie, would you mind taking my boys for some ice cream or mini golf or something? And I said, sure, Arch. I'd throw them in the car. We'd go do something in Houston. So I think I had a very, very important effect.
I wanted to stay on this. This is a question I've been thinking about all the time, and maybe nobody better to answer it than you two. I want to know why in the NFL, where there's only 32 teams, why there are not 32 great NFL quarterbacks. And I say this as a lifelong New York Jets fan who are living proof that there may not be enough good quarterbacks to go around. It is the most popular position in the most popular sport in this country. Everybody wants to be the quarterback. There are incredible quarterbacks throughout high school, in college. What is it that prevents the great college quarterback from becoming a great NFL quarterback?
Bad offensive line play. No, it's a good question. Quarterbacks to me are like really good baseball players, right? If you hit 250, 275, 300, that's huge, right? That's very successful. It's hard to play quarterback in the NFL, and sometimes coaches who have their system make it even harder. So I take a look at John Harbaugh, who's obviously a very smart guy, and what he's done with his quarterback, he's let him play the game that he can play, and Lamar's fantastic at it. But like my son or Josh Allen may not fit into that system. So, there's a little bit of that goes on as well, because the NFL coaches, have relatively short tenures typically. So a lot of offensive coordinators come in with a new system and you got to learn it. But it's a hard, to me, the bottom line, it's a very hard position to play.
I think Oliver hit the nail on the head talking about Lamar, the Ravens, John Harbaugh. Too many people are married to their system as opposed to marrying their system to who the person is or the player. The flip side of that, and I do think like the quarterback talent is out there. Like to Oliver's point, the player movement, you're seeing good quarterbacks leave to go be starters at other colleges. But on the flip side, a lot of the times those offenses get watered down in college, and the NFL systems are so much more complex from a terminology standpoint. And so a lot of systems in college football may have 1 or 2 word whole calls on offense. Our offense doesn't here because we're a little bit more complex and we're almost pro-style-ish to some degree. But those guys walk into an NFL building and they get thrown the verbiage or the vernacular they have to be able to rattle off. And it's like, hang on, I have to memorize what and know what it means and all the adjustments and checks and all the things that are built into the call. And so you already are taking the hardest, I think, position in all of sports, and you're not making it easier unless you adapt it to who the player is. So it's got to be player-driven, and too often. There's plenty of good quarterbacks out there. It's not player-driven enough, I think, systematically.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, all right, back to college sports. Oliver, you mentioned your son. So for those of you who don't know, Oliver's son is Andrew Luck, former Stanford great and NFL great, and now the new general manager of the Stanford football team. So can you talk a little bit about, not necessarily Stanford specific, but what the GM role is designed to do at the college level? Because this is a pretty much a new thing for college sports, where as it's looking more and more like pro sports, a lot of programs have added general manager to help with roster construction, with cap management, and fundraising. So can you tell us what these jobs are looking like?
The overall thesis is that everything that happens in the NFL happens just a few years later in major college football. So the structure and money and seat licenses, all the things that happen in the NFL, they trickle down very quickly to major college football. So the latest is having a full-fledged NFL-like personnel department, because the head coach simply doesn't have time to look at film of 1,500 guys in the portal, and you got to pick 2 or 3 to offer them. You don't have the time to do that. You're coaching your 85, 95, whatever roster size you have. So it's not just a GM who's in place, but it's ultimately an entire department, much like an NFL department, NFL team, where they have all kinds of studies, and they report, and they travel the country, and they look at kids, and they got et cetera, et cetera. So it's really taking that responsibility from the head coach and the assistant coaches and putting it on other individuals. In my son's case at Stanford, he's doing all the fundraising for NIL for the football team. He's oversees the coach and can hire or fire, as he just did last week, a coach. That's maybe an extreme, jump in terms of the structure, but it's going to end up there. And as you know, or many of you may know, at an NFL team, they're all structured a little bit differently, but a GM typically has some pretty significant responsibility in terms of who the head coach is. And there's a team president as well. Sometimes it's a family member, if it's obviously. So it's a little bit different from the NFL, but effectively it's going to look very much over the next 10, 15 years like an NFL team. And it's good, because there's lots of new jobs for a lot of college guys who have sort of tapped out with college personnel departments, or with pro personnel departments. They can now kind of do this on the college side, which I think is a great opportunity.
I think you look at, there's been a shift for sure, and we've all started to hire bigger recruiting staffs than ever. But there's been that added layer where maybe a couple of years ago the GM role in-house was really the head coach gave me a title to somebody that oversaw roster management for him to take that off the plate, or at least, give the information a capsule so he could bring it to him. Now you're seeing Stanford, Oklahoma just hired Jim Nagy, had been running the Senior Bowl for several years and had been an NFL scout. You're seeing a lot of the NFL game come into our game from how you personnel things and scout, to the point that we're playing Florida this year in our bowl game, and I was hanging out with Billy Napier during the week, the head coach at Florida, and Billy said, he goes, look, we've got a college scouting side that's outside of the high school recruiting side where we evaluate every roster in the country, and we know your players. Like, he's like sitting there, I'm like, hey, are you trying to tell me you're taking our players right now? and so some of them's formulas, and another SEC school I talked to, they said every player in the country that plays over 200 snaps, we have a full evaluation on every player. And so it's become like the NFL, where you have college scouting, where they have pro scouting, and then you have high school scouting, where they have college scouting. So we're currently looking at our high school, recruits. That's a group of people that are watching those people at the higher up schools. And then you have a group of people that are watching the current college players of who they want to target in the portal as free agency, if you will. And so the model's changed of how we get personnel and how we evaluate personnel, but the addition of the general manager component almost being like the AD for football to some degree is kind of new and unique.
And another quarterback point, who is suffering, I think, a little bit, and I'd be curious of your take, is high school quarterbacks. Because you can almost always get a guy out of the portal to give you a year at quarterback if you need it, as opposed to bringing a high school kid in and watching him develop for a year or two, because he's going to make a bunch of mistakes as he gets ready to play major college ball. So that I think it's a lousy time to be a high school quarterback, sadly.
High school players in general have suffered because of the portal. We're still very much a recruit and develop model here because, there's a component of, does the guy fit Tulane? Like, we still have to go to school here, right? Like, unlike,
wait a minute, what?
Yeah. Unlike
our faculty athletic rep is happy to hear you say that.
Yeah. Not going to name any names, but some FBS schools are like accelerated junior colleges, okay? And so we have to develop. And the other piece that, just like you have a certain amount of money you can allocate towards your roster, well, a high school player that you go out and recruit and develop, he's going to cost less than a proven transfer. And so for us, that's where I can find value. Now, we go out and develop a guy, he may get stolen. Right. That's the world we live in. But I think all high school players, especially at the highest level, their spots have been taken a little bit by the transfer market. And then the patience that we have as coaches to develop players and the leashes that coaches have been given, maybe shorter, has maybe felt, everybody feels the pressure of expediting that process. But I think at the end of the day, you have to stick and stay true to who you are and how you build a team. And the quarterback market definitely has shifted, though.
So, I mean, it sounds more and more like Major League Baseball, for example, where you have the big market teams that can buy up all the best free agents, and then you have the small market teams that have to find the diamonds in the rough and then try to develop them and then hope they hang on to them. But what typically happens is they turn into all-stars, and then the Dodgers, the Yankees sign them away, or the Mets sign them away, and then they get hurt. But this is as a Mets fan. But so, and we talked about this earlier, that you sort of need to do a little bit of Moneyball at the college football level. So how do you do that as a coach? And can the relationships where you're meeting with the families, you're meeting with the kids, you're helping them develop into a college athlete, do you think there are ways that Tulane or schools like Tulane can hang on to some of these players, or is it just someone's going to come in and offer them $3 million to transfer and they're not going to be able to say no?
Yeah, I think every person's different. Everyone has different values. I do feel as though if a kid is in his 7th or 8th semester here at Tulane and degree completion is in sight, we try to help them understand what the value of that is. There is value there, that the long-term dollar amount may outweigh the short-term money grab. But, yeah. Now, that doesn't always win. It sounds great, but I've lost with that same argument. But I think everybody's different. And to your point, I use that same analogy. Our head coaches were in a meeting in our conference last July, and I said this amongst the coaches, and then Trent Dilfer went to the media and used it. I'm like, Trent, can you come up with your own thoughts? And so I just like to poke at Trent all the time. But Trent, I use this in our head coaches meeting. I said, look, guys, we don't need to worry about trying to become the Yankees. We all just need to try to be the Royals and build the best team we can with what we got and not complain, because the Yankees are always going to have more money than you. And so we can sit here and whine and complain, or we can adapt and evolve and try to piece it together and make it the best for us. And so we're very fortunate here. We're participating. Are we participating at the same level as the SEC? No. But we're not going to sit around on our hands and hope it goes good. We're going to go out and make it go good.
And Oliver, from your perspective, in this new landscape where somehow Stanford and UNC are in the same conference, that also has SMU in it, and things have shifted so much, and obviously a lot of that is driven by football revenue and people wanting to go to the Big Ten and the SEC. Is the current model sustainable, or do you see further fracturing, maybe where the top 20, 30, 40 football programs break off into their own league, or do they all stay under the same umbrella?
Yeah, there's a school of thought that the TV contracts, the broadcast agreements that the big conferences have, all come up for renewal in 29, 30, 31, sort of 5, 6 years from now. There's a belief that there may be another reshuffling of the deck. I don't understand how Stanford and Cal, two schools that I know pretty well. I had a daughter go to Stanford, play volleyball, as well as my son Andrew. I don't know how that's sustainable to keep flying across the country. When those kids, like my daughter as an example, she didn't want to play pro volleyball. There really is no pro volleyball to play. She wanted to get a good education and go to Stanford's business school, which she did, right? And so they're serious students. And flying across the country and spending all that time and effort sitting in the middle seat of a Southwest Airlines plane, changing planes in Denver to get back to Palo Alto or San Jose.
Oliver hates Southwest Airlines. This is the second shot you've taken at them.
I love Southwest, but it's I don't think that's a model that Stanford and Cal can live with in the long term, because I think it's going to hurt their recruiting. I think it's just not that attractive. When Virginia Tech goes out to Palo Alto, that's like a culture clash, So we'll see. I mean, they made their bed. They got to sleep in it, as they say. But I think there's going to be absolutely another major reshuffling round. And it might be that it ends up as the top 50 teams. And, people will fight for numbers 45 through 50. We could probably all agree on who the top 40 or 45 would be. And then there's a few questionable teams in there, and it's all going to be driven by football.
Yeah, there was a.
So I'll say this because I think it underscores what I just said. The ACC agreement that kept Florida State and Clemson in that conference for another whatever number of years, they're going to distribute money based on television viewership. Typically, schools have all been given equal shares. No more. Now it's going to be based on, among other things, but a significant component is going to be TV viewership. So, it's all driven by lucre, as they say.
And there was an article, I think, in the Wall Street Journal that Oregon men's basketball team this year traveled 27,000 miles for their games, including, I think, 5 trips that were over 2,500 miles, and that every men's basketball player on the Oregon team took online classes only because they were away from campus too much.
And that's not a good model. I mean, that really isn't, right?
Yeah.
I love sports, but these are academic institutions, and they should have some, tethering to their academics.
So, John, I have to ask, because this was all very public. How does it feel to be in a position where a school wanted you and then settled on Bill Belichick? It's gotta feel pretty awesome, right? You don't have to answer that.
I thought the most uncomfortable question would be about our quarterback last year. No, my brother, whether anything did or didn't occur between North Carolina and myself, my brother.
I didn't say it did.
Yeah, I didn't either. My brother said, "Did you receive a phone call about a job that Bill Belichick took?" He said, "And you're my little brother?" But no, roll wave.
Yeah, there we go. There we go. Okay, no, but really, so how did it feel? No. But in terms of where Tulane is, how do you make it sustainable when there is more and more money being poured in? We've talked about the difficulty in terms of recruiting, but do you see, and it doesn't have to be Tulane specific, but schools in the G5 or the G6, schools that are not getting access to this billions of dollars in rev share through the college football playoff, do you see it that the group of six will be competing for national championships in 10, 15 years, or is that just going to be sort of like we're seeing now in college basketball, right? Again, if this is sort of a trend where it's the schools that spend the most money are going to be in the championship. And whether they have access, give access to everybody is a different story, but whether there's a real chance.
Yeah, I think 2 points. Is there access or not? If there's access, we're going to find every way we can to be successful and win. Now, I'm biased and I may have blinders on. And so I'm going to compete to win against whoever we play, anyone, anywhere, anytime. There are hurdles. You know, when you have call it a couple $1 million roster versus a $15 million roster, you're going sometimes into a gunfight with a knife, and you have to figure out unique ways to make yourself competitive and different. And can you sustain it over the long haul of a year, or can you be the best in your league and find that secret sauce at the end, whether it's chemistry and cohesion and culture, that maybe beats somebody that may have a touch more talent than you. And so I think the point of the Cinderella maybe being harder and harder is very real. Is it dead? I don't know about that yet, but it's challenging. I mean, you look up and you go, man, that roster looks a lot different, and they're able to just steal players from you left and right. Well, that makes it very challenging.
Yeah, I would say the best evidence that we can continue to compete is the way we have been competing, particularly over the last few years, where the money has been completely unregulated, and we know that rosters at some of these Power 5 schools or Power 4 schools are way, they're getting paid way more than our players are, and it's only over the last 3 years that we've had the most success that we've had in the history of the program. So we weren't beating USC before the NIL era. So the fact that we beat them in the Cotton Bowl in the NIL era, I think bodes well for what we're doing, and not to whatever the expression would be, but obviously coaching matters. And to have gone from Coach Fritz, who is a wonderful coach, now to Coach Sumrall, it is, as a Duke alum, doubly sweet that UNC did not take away Coach Sumrall. As a lifelong Jets fan, it's nice to be able to channel all of my hatred to one institution. But I mean, it's a testament to the value of coaching and educating. And I think for most of us on this campus, this is what it's all about. So thank you for being the right kind of coach for all of college sports, but for choosing to be here at Tulane, because it's obviously made such a difference.
Yeah.
So from success to talking about a little more about failure, can you?
What did you do to him? Whatever it is, tell me so I don't.
In the last few minutes we have, for both of you, just to talk about how different the landscape is. And Coach, it seems like you've been a head coach for a lot longer, but this is only your 4th year. But you've been a coach for a long time. And then Oliver, you've been involved in college athletics and at the highest levels for as long as anyone around It's just because he's so old. But how things have changed in terms of, we've talked about recruiting, but from a university's perspective,
Well,
how the new model fits into what we're trying to do.
Yeah,
on
so
campus.
I think most, I'll let you speak, Coach, on your own thoughts, but I think most folks in the industry, in the business, are happy to see revenue being shared with student athletes. I mean, football and other sports are tough, they're hard, you spend a lot of time. Coaches see, players see coaches with, multi-million dollar contracts, full stadiums and advertisements, et cetera. So I think it's good that they're able to earn some money. The system, in terms of how this got put in place, is awful. You can't even call it a system. It was just sort of chaos. But I think that's, by and large, a positive. What I believe has been lacking and has been diminished in importance is the value of a 4-year or 5-year degree, right? So when I was in, and easy to say, but when I was in college in the 70s and early 80s, I was a student and I was a football player, and I tried to have some fun, right, as we all do in college. But now there's a whole business aspect that's been dropped into that equation, and the football's not suffering. So the football part is not suffering. The kids are working harder than ever, right, and they're more talented than ever. What's suffering is the ability to, really enjoy the 4 or 5 years to drink deeply out of the well of West Virginia University or Tulane University or wherever. That's missing for a lot of kids, and I find that sad. Right, because we have a pretty strong strain in our society of anti-intellectualism in this great country of ours, and we're just sort of playing into that sort of, stereotype. And I think that's been lacking a little bit. If I look at the past 40, 50 years that I've been involved with college sports.
100% for players being paid in some manner. The biggest challenge, to your point, as a coach, and I'm going to year 21 as a college football coach, which every now and then I'm like, man, I've been doing this for 21 years. It's pretty amazing. I'm very fortunate that this is my 4th year as a head coach, and so I shared this with y'all before we walked in. I don't know it any other way as a head coach, where some of my peers who have been doing the head coaching thing longer than me, and these changes came about, their world spun real fast on them. For me, my world spun real fast because I became a head coach and all this stuff was going on at the same time. The part that got a little out of whack in maybe how we're controlling some of these things is simultaneously, I'll never forget, I was an assistant at the University of Kentucky, and Mitch Barnhart, our athletics director, who became the AD when I was a sophomore in college, is still there as an absolute rock star. Walked in and talked through, hey guys, this is coming, transfer portal, NIL, and we don't know if there's any real rules. And I'm like, that sounds like a great idea. Let's have no rules about anything. And so there's never been any boundaries, or limitations to how you do it. There's no process. If a coach leaves, and he's under contract, one of my assistants leaves, I leave, there's a thing in your contract called a buyout. So there's some sort of, you're stuck to this. We have nothing stuck to anything. It's just free movement all the time. The money, you don't have to report any of it. We think we're going to a direction where there's going to be some sort of checks and balances there, but it's almost like we opened Pandora's box and now we're trying to figure out how do we align it and keep it organized. Well, good luck. And as soon as I may be in the minority here, but I think as soon as we think we got it in line, it's going to get out of line again a little bit.
Can I just say one thing, though, as a point of optimism? College football and I think college basketball are setting television viewing records. Right? The games are better than ever. Mm-hmm. The American public seems to be, very interested in watching. There's an argument that, if the quarterback is driving a Maserati, that's kind of cool. And, I'm going to watch that kid to see, well, he's got a real ego. He's driving a Maserati. Let's see what kind of a player he is. And what you'll begin to see, and maybe you already have, is fans treating players much more like professional players, right? It used to be you wouldn't boo a college player. if you were booing, it was the coach we're booing at, not the player, as if you could tell the difference. But I do think there's a shift in how fans are viewing the game. But all the broadcasters can't wait to broadcast more games. Fox, as you may know, is one of the major broadcasters with ESPN, with Disney, with football, college basketball. They created their own postseason tournament, the Crown, and that's just an indication that they want to get in and get more programming. So I think at that level, college athletics is really doing well.
Yeah, our shot clock is about to go off. I do want to add, not only in terms of football and men's basketball, but also we're seeing in terms of women's basketball, the ratings are as high as they've ever been. Women's volleyball, that women's sports continues to rise as well. So in many ways, college sports have never been stronger, but there's also never been more unpredictability. We are out of time, but I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank our panelists. I want to thank our sponsors, Maserati and Southwest. I want to... And thank you again to Coach for all that you do for Tulane, and Oliver, thank you for all that you've done for sports. So, thank you all.